All right, Dr. Julie Gurner. I have been very much excited to talk to you for a while now. We've engaged on Substack and a little bit on X. And as I mentioned when we were talking, you have what I think is one of the coolest jobs out there these days, and definitely the most desirable. I can't go on LinkedIn without seeing an executive performance coach of some level, of some type throughout the world. But you've been in the arena for now 15 plus years as an executive performance coach. And your origin story is actually really quite cool. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. Like I started out in like very early on in graduate school in adult psychopathology and forensics. So I started out kind of in that arena, moved into academics a bit after that. I'm trying to make it condensed here for your audience. And then from there, I was asked to advise on a tech product. You frequently get that ask, periodically in academics. So, I was advising on that product. Things went pretty silent. And eventually I was contacted by a venture firm saying, hey, we have this guy. He's really smart, really bright founder, but he's received a lot of funding. And, he's really having a hard time making decisions. Like, you're the only psychology person we know. Like, would you mind meeting with him? So I went, to meet with him. It really was only a few sessions. I could see very clearly where the problems are, where he was getting stuck. And, within a month, the guy's like back on track, able to do what he needs to do. And I just felt in that moment, it was like a hand in glove. Like, it's that moment where you're like, wow, this is fantastic. As somebody who comes from a clinical background, you're used to thinking about how to make ill people well, but not well people kind of optimal. And so, but it's all the same research. It's all the same stuff. It's all the little kind of levers you can pull. And so when people are genuinely, very healthy, they still have kind of these little cognitive slips that if you can spot them and help them, kind of really shift them into overdrive because they don't need the support around the, kind of unhealthy place where they need a lot of that structure and build. So it was really fantastic. I ended up kind of getting referred to others. I worked with a company and, did some work with a company that ended up having a really significant sale, developed a reputation, and then started, once you have a solid reputation, you move from kind of person to person. And much like any other business, you start getting referred by former clients to other clients. And that's just kind of how you build on yourself. So it's really been a fantastic ride. And I've been excited to do this work because I'm kind of like many people who do this job, I'm a very behind the scenes kind of person. And so I love seeing my work out there in the world through other people who get to be the front man or front woman for the work.
And you alluded to the fact why I think executive performance coaching is probably well suited for clinical psychologists. You mentioned getting people from ill to well and then well to thriving. And you even had a phenomenal post recently about your mission statement, which is just to help high performing be exceptional. And I love that, just so succinct and so concise. But the psychological background and foundation that you have going from working with clients, I assume one on one, to getting that
Mhm.
by mouth referral to fall into this realm that you now are enormous in and continue to grow. It's just so cool, like taking these opportunities when they come. But again, clinical psychology, I majored in psychology and speech and hearing science, but that foundation, the little baseline understanding that I have, but we also understand as a society, as you mentioned, the research and evidence behind getting people to improve. Perfection's impossible, but we can always improve systematically. So whether it's from ill to well, or in your case, from high performing to exceptional, the strategies are the same, but maybe the lens is a little different.
I agree with you. I think that the challenge, if you come from just a psychology background, is really learning how business works in various levels of the business, right? So like a startup with 10 people looks a lot different than a company with 300, looks a lot different than a company of, hundreds of thousands to, like even millions. So it's a really wild kind of ride understanding the kind of nuances that happen there. And then that the individual psychologies that are a part of leading those organizations, that are a part of like keeping their teams focused and at a variety of levels and understanding what the different positions, even for a lot of psychologists, they wouldn't know what they do. So like it's a very interesting area to operate in. And I think that's where the crossover is so fun and so fantastic because great businesses are just, comprised of exceptional people. And they are not exceptional in every way, but they are certainly exceptional in very specific ways. And they, much like what you were talking about, how there's always kind of room to improve and to become better. There are people who are open to that and are actively seeking it out. And if you walk around the world, you find that most people are not, they're kind of digging into who they are. They're defending who they are. They're not really open to becoming better than who they are. And these are people who are always looking for the edge. They're always looking for, how can I get a little faster? What are the things that I'm not seeing? What are the things that I should be called out on that no one is calling me out on? They're looking for those types of things, the same things that make ordinary people very defensive.
That makes a lot of sense. So you have multiple posts a week, but you have one on Mondays, which would be the new post for paid subscribers, where you do a deep dive on one topic. And it's funny you mentioned like the business understanding and background, because while I love so much of what you write, sometimes you'll talk about like types of funding or types of businesses, and that kind of goes over my head because I don't have the business acumen that you have. Did you have that when you started initially getting that referral? Has this been like OJT that your curiosity has helped evolve over time?
That it's helped my own curiosity evolve over time. I'm also married to an entrepreneur who has gone through a lot of these things. So even just watching them, hearing them, being in those rooms, understanding them, and then I would do a lot of, even in my early days. What's kind of interesting is that as I've evolved, so has my knowledge. So you don't start out working with people who are running billion-dollar companies. You start out with people who are small teams or smaller teams or recently funded. So you get to kind of learn in that journey too. But I think it has really helped me to be with someone who is part of that kind of business journey and has worked, everything from traditional kind of jobs in the corporate world to startups to funding their own company, to all those types of things.
Love that. You have a very close network, even inside your own home, to give you some
Yeah,
awareness, but also,
certainly.
as you mentioned, like some people hop in, maybe I would imagine ignorantly, if you become an executive performance coach, you want to start working with big clients right away. But that systematic build, just like from getting ill to well and well to
Yeah.
thriving, when we first start out and we're green, learning on the ground, grassroots, developing that credibility. Yeah, absolutely. I can only imagine all the different factors that you have to consider when you start moving up to the realm that you operate at now.
No, thank you. I think that one of the things too is that like if you don't take that path in kind of moving up, then you're not effective with the higher level clients. It's kind of like I love football, but I want to play for the NFL. Like if you just jump into playing with the NFL, that may be your dream, but you are going to get crushed on that field. You are not going to know what to do. Those other people are going to run you over and you're not going to be effective. So I think about it like you have to go through playing early football. You're going to have to get tackled a few times. You're going to have to fail a little bit. You're going to have to learn what the right moves are. What are the things that are going to make you better at your job? And so, like if you go up the ranks in that way, I think a lot of people don't have the patience for it. They kind of want to go right into the NFL. But if you do that, you're not going to get good at your work. And then if you're not good at your work, your reputation doesn't, kind of blossom from there either. You want a reputation where you take on clients that, you can help. You're able to assist them. They find your work so good that they refer you to four other people that you know. And that's how you work up the chain. I think that's the cheat code is that you do well. And then people want to share you because you've done a good job for them. And they often will share you to people who are a couple levels above them. And so you start kind of growing with your referral network and you get into different places and you become trusted and you always want to act, with integrity and do the jobs you can do. And if you only take on the things that you can do well and really nail, man, I mean, I think that, if you look out in the world today, a lot of people are not great at the jobs that they do, right? I mean, even if they're, bagging your groceries, they're kind of half-hearted, slinging them in the bags. But the people who do a fantastic job, whether it's serving coffee or it's the work that I do, I think that they really stand out. That's true everywhere. So you want to put yourself in a position where you're able to really nail it, to build your credibility and reputation.
And you've just alluded to a few things that comes up time and time again in your newsletter is a lot of things that can help you stand out and thrive. Don't get me wrong, we need our expertise, we need our knowledge base for what our unique subject matter expertise may be. But man, like these unteachable attributes we talk about, it really is just
Yeah.
effort. It's caring. I like to cuss sometimes, make people feel comfortable. I say the most important attribute you can possess is giving a shit. Like if you actually care and then you show up consistently, you're patient with the progress, but just caring. And then you teach very systematically different ways to care and make an impact in your job, whether that's how you connect with others, how you serve if you're the number two, the number one, to tie in
Mhm.
to the business, how you can make other people look good and be selfless because selfishly it's going to help you too with your network. All like each newsletter that you have expands on these topics so well. But I love that you highlight attributes that we all can really take on if we care and want to put in the effort behind it.
I think that you hit on caring, and I think that it's so important because one of the traits that I see sometimes is that people think it's really cool to not care about things, like to be kind of apathetic, like I don't really care about that, or I don't really care about what my boss says, or I don't really care about. And if you look at every successful person out there, they care deeply. I mean, they care, they take it personally sometimes when they shouldn't. They care so deeply about the work that they do, about the products that they're building, about the leader that they are, about the companies that they are head of or a part of, that I think that that is a common trait, right? Like that we don't talk as much about is caring deeply to the point where, you go the extra mile, you do the extra things. This is what kind of top performers do. And you see that with athletes, you see it with people in, business, you see it in executives. You just see it everywhere. Everyone who is exceptional at their job cares deeply.
And something else I'll say often, and I'm probably getting this from you and other people and just reframe it a different way, but I often say after the most important thing is caring. The second most important is not caring too much to the point where it's
Yeah.
stagnation, or you become so laser focused on an issue that really takes stepping back or the people involved. You had a great post recently on prioritizing your commitments. So what you commit to and how you commit to it, tying into that simplification, high performing individuals that are thriving really take a handful of commitments within their business, within their life, and they prioritize those. Do you find, I would imagine high performing individuals maybe care too much too often? Is that an opportunity sometimes for the clients that you work with?
I think so. I mean, like, I think that the thing that is really common among all of them is kind of speed of execution, right? They're all very fast. So they don't have a lot of patience internally for the companies that they often run. And so when you talk about caring deeply and almost caring too deeply, is if they see something going on and it's in, a very distant part of the organization, their kind of instinct is to swoop in, which sometimes is good to swoop. So I'm not going to totally kind of say that that's bad, but sometimes they want to go in, swoop in, and fix it immediately rather than help the leader to see, fix, and understand that problem, which is going to take a little bit more time. Because they know that they could fix it quickly and they could solve that problem. And, some of these people who've come up through their own businesses, they've started out doing all the jobs and then they kind of rise up through it too. They know how these jobs could, should, and can be done. And so oftentimes the instinct is to, I'll just go in and fix it, or I'll just tell X to fix it. And, that's not how people learn. So if you just tell someone to do an action, you'll get the action, but then they won't understand why they did the action, why it was important to do. They don't have any context. So you saving that extra 30 seconds of giving context is going to get you another problem probably a month down the line. So like these are the little kind of tweaks or adjustments, because if you could make that tweak and then that person can have context to solve their own problem in a month when it comes up again, and they understand how that leader thinks about it and how they should be thinking about it, you've just saved that person, a certain amount of their time and hassle, honestly. So you want to be sure that you're always kind of thinking about where can they optimize? What are the little things? So that's certainly one of them, and a great call out from you on kind of how you can make these little adjustments.
And it's funny, a lot of your newsletters are tailored toward business, entrepreneurs,
Mhm.
CEOs, of course. But like any great wisdom, you can translate that across domains. And as I hear you talking, it resonates so much with parenting. So
Oh, I
like
bet. I
you see
bet.
problems doing things for them rather than taking the time to teach them, stay emotionally regulated, and be present with them to try and guide them. That's a long game. But obviously it's part of success of the family or in business of the team where yeah acutely you're going to fix a problem quicker, but chronically, like as you mentioned, the problem will persist. It'll rise in different ways. They'll lean on you maybe when they don't need to. So how can you, like another great post of yours recently that I thought of, how can you train others to maybe see problems or think like you more? So see your perspective, explaining that and where you're coming from, and you may at some point have that opportunity where people absorb that wisdom from you and then they start problem solving on their own. It's funny, the tie-ins of your newsletters, they come together in so many ways.
Well, it's the same philosophy, it kind of just different portions of it. And you mentioned a word that I love, that people don't talk enough about. You said talked about emotional regulation, and you talked about it as a parent, but I think that skill it exists everywhere. And so, like, tell me a little bit. You do resilience training. I'd love to hear a little bit about how you see that skill in the work that you do.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. So yeah, I was formerly taught in a program called Combat Operational Stress Control, and then a component of it, Caregiver Occupational Stress Control. So throughout my career in the military, I've worked primarily in hospitals, so they had Caregiver Occupational Stress Control. And then over time, I started taking over the program in Guam and teaching it, and becoming really passionate about it because of the impacts that it had on my own personal life. So the goal is to just teach stress management and resilience skills. A lot of the populations I serve are ones that serve warfighters, serve the military. So I'm not talking
Mm.
to as many infantry or ground fighters. I'm talking more to the components that serve them. But we know, so as an audiologist, I talk to people about preserving their hearing and wearing hearing protection and different strategies there because it is the number one injury in the military every year, noise-induced damage. About
I didn't
10%,
know that.
10% of the population acquires damage to their hearing from hazardous noise just due to its prevalence, due to extreme environments, and a lot of other factors. But then I'll ask during a stand down, how many people in the room are impacted by stress? And of course, every hand goes up. Everybody's impacted by stress. But we don't have injury criteria until we start needing to get to professional intervention. So that
Great point.
illness intervention is not as high, but how we function. I've been curious since I was a kid as to why the same stressor can be present, but why do you see such a variability of performance in the presence of that stressor? And I've come to the conclusion that it is the skill that is resilience. But I believe a lot of things go into resilience, whether that's past experience, support systems, or your own developed strategy. So I try to think about those buckets and then formulate plans to help cultivate again what I think is a skill, just like all the skills that you talk about in your newsletter. EQ, which you emphasize quite a bit, the emotional quotient. Absolutely. Our emotional intelligence is a skill that can be trained. It takes time. You can't just jump up to being resilient, just like you can't just jump up to being Dr. Julie Gurner. You need 15 years of experience in the arena to get there. But I love the idea that we can empower ourselves to train these skills. And emotional intelligence, I was definitely planning on talking to you today because, yeah, we love to think about IQ, adaptability quotient. So flexibility is
Yeah.
absolutely another skill I like to emphasize. But if we
Yep.
can't regulate our emotions, everything else will fall apart.
I completely agree. And flexibility is such an important element of that. When you're talking about flexibility, I think about cognitive flexibility because, a rule of thumb, at least, in psychology and everywhere, is that anything that is rigid breaks, right? Like it's more likely to break. And so the same is true, right? Like when you can't adapt, when you think things should be a certain way and you get stuck on it, when you can't kind of evolve, like those are the people who don't make it to, like especially in business. If you get so rigid in things and you can't evolve, man, you are not going to make it to the next level. You're going to get so stuck. You're going to get so mired. You're going to take things on so hard that you won't be able to kind of move forward. So I love that you talk about flexibility because I think sometimes people will see flexibility as weakness and they see rigidity as strength. Like I'm just going to hold this line, but it's holding the wrong line, right? Like they're holding a line that actually is very fragile. Every time I see rigidity, I think fragility. It's like, to me, those are like one and the same. So when you hear people that are flexible, who are able to take feedback, or people who are able to see things a different way, or people who are willing to kind of go there with you, you know that you've got someone, okay, I can work with this. This is a person that like you can do a lot with. When people are very rigid, I think about it like the person who will come to you and say, even though, doesn't happen in coaching so much, but it would happen in clinical practice, they'll say, all right, Dr. Gurner, I'll talk about everything but the drinking. Well, like you already
Where's
know
the
what the
opportunity?
problem is. I know, right? So, but there's a rigidity there that like I'm not really open to like discussing everything. And because of that, the area that's rigid is fragile. It's the area that's problematic. It's always the case. So people have all sorts of tells. That's a really obvious one that's funny probably for your audience, but I think rigidity is just a terrible trait to have, no matter where you hold it. Relationships, your work, your philosophy, how you deal with crises, everything.
I couldn't agree more. And it's interesting that the word resilience, I mean, originally comes from the ability to return to form. So it
Mhm.
had to do with inanimate objects being able to be flexible and not be overly rigid because eventually nature is going to have enough pressure to break the fragility that is rigidity. So resilience has to do with flexibility. Human resilience is a newer term. I think it came up in the 1960s, 1970s when they started applying that term to resilience. But fr fragility was rigidity. If you were overly rigid and you couldn't, eventually nature would make you break. So it's funny that that term even has flexibility within it before it started being applied to humans. But without question, not only cognitively, I had a great conversation with Donald Robertson recently, the author on Stoicism and philosophy, and he talked about not only cognitive flexibility but coping flexibility. And I hadn't thought about that before, but as you mentioned, some people are extremely resilient or extremely high performing in one aspect of their life, but sometimes we don't translate how we look at problems or how we cope with problems in business to home or to our personal pursuits or any other capacity or drinking, as you mentioned in your example. So looking at things differently, but also adjusting how we respond to them with our coping strategies. I love the idea of flexibility, encouraging resilience.
I think that one of the primary things that I see in my work around resilience is really how people interpret events and interpret the world. I approach everything through a very cognitive lens, and it's almost even for the most tragic things. So I'll give a personal example and then a professional one. But let's just say that someone loses a parent. There's a very different a resilience between the person who says, I don't know how I'm ever going to go on, and the person who says, I was so grateful to have the time that I did. Right? Like those two ways of interpreting that loss or thinking about that loss is going to directly impact how that person copes with that loss and how they're able to be resilient through it. The person who says, I don't know how I'm going to live without them, may be isolative, shut others off. They may, all of those things. The person who's like, I'm so grateful, they may, be more likely to reach out, surround themselves with people, have people share memories, have a way of processing through that. And in business, it's the same. You have a partnership deal that falls through. Your first big contract like fails. You have a product that doesn't land. Nobody's subscribing to. You're kind of losing the funding round. You're not, kind of landing the investors that you want. Some people will say, I suck. It's terrible. My company, whatever. So you'll have these people, and then you'll have the others who say, we haven't found the person who sees the vision yet, right? And that person is going to deal with that situation so much differently, and it's going to impact their actions. One might give up. One is just going to run harder and talk to more people. So you have like a very different way of interpreting the information that you're getting from the world. And to me, that really builds in. You'll see when people are, really operating at high levels, nothing is really terrible. It's all information. It's like, okay, we're getting feedback on that, but, like that's not going to be resonating with people. So, maybe they'll cut it. Maybe they'll move in a different direction. And if it is, then they're, kind of moving in that direction and they'll go forward. But the way in which they interpret the bad things is just far less catastrophic. And you see that in how they move ahead. People forget that Amazon had a phone, the Fire phone, that failed dramatically. Like no one is using a Fire phone today because it failed. It was absolutely terrible. But Amazon's still doing great, and Jeff is doing just fine. And he wasn't taken out of his business world because of a very public failure. He went on stage, he talked about this Fire phone, it absolutely bombed. And for people of that caliber, sometimes people think, well, they have everything else going on, it doesn't matter. They also shoulder the most reputation risk. They put something out there, they're the biggest name you can think of. And so when something bombs, it bombs big. And that can influence other people who were at that caliber, but certainly not him. So just some things to think about, even through like a cognitive lens, how it changes how we move in the world.
The power of reframing. One
Mm,
incident can happen, as I mentioned before, as a kid. One stressor
yeah,
happens, but the impressions that 10 people have of it is going to greatly influence their function. And
absolutely.
I love the idea of most charitable interpretation. I know Dr. Becky Kennedy talks about it in her parenting book, Good Inside. I think I had heard that term before, but we've always talked about like just different interpretations of events. But I
Hmm.
like the idea of what's the most charitable thing I can say right now, even if I don't fully agree with it, just encouraging that executive function in your brain to not come to this conclusion and then get on to some emotional reason behind it. Let's consider the best possible opportunity to look for advantages.
Well, I'm going to disagree with the most charitable interpretation. I would say, what is another accurate interpretation I could make? And because I think that it's easy for us to dismiss in hard times things that we say, well, I don't really like that isn't really true though. Like that's something that I would hear from someone who's irritated, right? Like I'm not going to think that. It's not really true. And forcing them or trying to encourage them to think about the thing that wouldn't be true, I think would make them probably very irritable. So instead of making people irritable, I'll say, well, what's another way of looking at this that's equally true? And there's an equally true way of looking, like even if we talk about that, like parental loss, there's an true way of looking at that. Like, are you also grateful? I mean, yeah, I am. I am grateful. Well, let's focus on that. Like, let's look at other thoughts that are kind of in alignment with that. And the same is true for business. Like, if there is an alternate way of looking at something that is equally true, I want them to think about something that's equally accurate, because you're choosing between two accurate things then, and you're choosing the one that's most detrimental to you. So, kind of tell me why that would be and what path that's going to take you on. And then tell me about this equally accurate one and what path that's going to take you on. And why wouldn't we go down the path that's going to take you in a better place? And so I try to engage them rationally, because most of them are not going to, they're not like touchy-feely folks, and they're probably not going to like me fluffing things up for them and making them feel good. I think they hire me to not make them feel good in many ways. So I try to make sure that I'm always really shooting straight with them. And it's a harder way of getting to the same truth. But I do think that people can appreciate that, and probably military folks too are very aware of not wanting to be kind of too fluffed up around some of this stuff. They probably are very appreciative of just shoot straight with me and let's talk about how we get to the other side of this.
Such an important reframe. That's what we're talking about, reframing. And it's such an important
Okay.
it's such an important point you made. It has to be believable for
Yeah.
sure and accurate to yourself. Like both are actually quite accurate. I've been dealing with a lot of clients or people that are dealing with uncertainty. So like they have
Mm,
no idea. Maybe it's an event that's happened or
yeah.
even a person. Like so someone walks past me, I say hello, and they ignore me. There are 100 different reasons that they could have ignored me. A lot of them could be bad, but most charitably, it could be they're having a bad day, and that could be very likely. But that's also
Absolutely.
it's important that I believe it. So rather than just be like, let's just be completely blindly optimistic and everything's fluffy, absolutely not. So that's I'm
Right.
gonna start. I'm like many things I get from you. I'm gonna start using that. It has to be believable. It has to be accurate, or else then no, you're just gonna brush that by and stick with the conclusions you had originally. Thank you.
No, I agree. I mean, I think that but you have to meter it to the person too, right? I think that um, I have a certain vantage point just because of the people that I speak with. So I think that for different people, maybe different things resonate more strongly.
Sure. You also had another term. I've used similar terms, but just the way you put it, I enjoyed it so much. You talked about improving your psychological pain tolerance
Mm,
a while ago, and that really stuck with me because that resonates so much when I talk about mental resilience. I
yeah.
love to use physical fitness training as a vehicle to train the mind, but it's less about the body signals that I'm having. It's more about how my mind controls my body. But you don't even have to
Yeah.
test your body to test your mind. Tell me about psychological pain tolerance and how you use that maybe in your realm, in your own personal life, or just riff on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that I have discovered, and this is a kind of an interesting one, is that when people reach success fairly early on, they actually haven't had a lot of failures. Everyone doesn't have to go through catastrophic failure to get to a great place. And sometimes you get people who, they're younger. They have these, 1, 2, 3 person projects. They go really well. They make a few $1,000,000. They're really excited. They get on project number 2. They really kick off. They're really excited. And they get their first big, like, loss. They get their first big hits, right? And I think that when you have that experience where, you're so optimistic, things are going so well, you're all in, you believe entirely in this, and then you get hit with some things. I mean, so this is the first example. And then you have to figure out, how do I get back up? How do I brush off? I've lost maybe half of my money that I put in because I was so sure that this was going to work. And, my family's now feeling the pain of that. My mortgage is now feeling a little more painful. I have all this other stuff that's feeling a little painful. Like, how do I deal with that? Like, and then you got to prevent them from being the, like, I'm a failure. Maybe it was all luck. Like people will start to question that stuff. So it's expanding their ability to kind of fulfill their emotional range. Like pain is a part of everything is energy. So like pain is energy, that kind of the struggle is energy, but you don't want to suppress the energy. I'm a big fan of like, okay, well, how do we like use what you feel and the intensity of that to really kind of move into a place where you can be like go even harder, like be even more impactful, really drive in a way that is more like has more fuel to it and more fire to it than even before when you were much more comfortable. And then they begin to kind of expand on that. I think the other thing though is that when I think about psychological pain tolerance, there are people who, get little hits all the time. Maybe they work for a boss that's pretty challenging and sometimes not very nice to them. They are in situations that are very hard in kind of the external world. Sometimes they have to do a lot of public facing things where they face a lot of like hits from time to time, or they're somebody who's in sales where they get, obviously rejected all the time. So how do you kind of like expand your window of pain tolerance, your threshold? And I always tell people to do things that are hard outside of work to start, and it bleeds into the things in work. So sometimes I'll have folks, if they're, physically capable, like, what's something you've always wanted to do? Like, have you always wanted to try, like, running your first 5K? Have you wanted to try, like, doing that yoga thing that like nobody can do and bends you in the pretzels? Have you ever wanted to try like X, Y, and Z and get them out of the business sphere to like push themselves a little bit to show what they can overcome? And then what's fascinating is that self knowledge bleeds back into their work. So if it can't happen within the work sphere, I get it outside of the work sphere to kind of bleed in rather than the work sphere kind of bleeding out. And that often works just incredibly well. And you see that on kind of an opposite sphere. If you work with athletes, you'll see that their beliefs in what they do on the field or, in the arena definitely bleed into what they feel sometimes they can do outside of that. And it's such a fascinating thing for me because that, like, how will we talk about that flow from like situation to situation, whether it's like, contextually at work and it moves into sports or sports to work, or what you do, like even conquering a psychological challenge around like problem solving. I've had people who are just really big solvers in other ways. They really nerd out about other things. But your mind is the same. Like you bring yourself wherever you go. And so if you're able to expand it in one arena, that expansion doesn't collapse in another usually. So I bet on that.
You're speaking to my soul right now. So
Okay.
this is training the skill that is resilience, I believe, like
Mhm.
pursuing something challenging for you in a domain that's an opportunity, maybe outside of where you're typically operating. The
Mhm.
exceptional businessman, challenge yourself personally. The stay-at-home dad, go challenge yourself in a like volunteer or something outside of
Yeah.
that. It's going to make you better elsewhere if you can translate those lessons. It's my favorite thing to think about, to practice myself and then to try and write on. But I love to hear that you're doing that. And even for top tier individuals
Yeah.
performing in business, it's an opportunity for all of us.
Yeah, I had a client who went and like challenged himself to like go do a big mountain climb. And, like it required him to do a lot of things he didn't like. Like, you have to do a lot of training for something like that. And it wasn't stuff that, he naturally like. I think that people, sometimes they're so immersed in their work and they have been for so long that doing anything outside of it feels like they've been living in this kind of like tunnel for a long time. And so he was able to kind of get outside of that. And it just like he had to take a few weeks off of work, like, I mean, it takes a lot of time to do this stuff. But, it was amazing to see like just how excited he took a ton of pictures. He was very like engaged in that moment, and how most people would look at that guy and say, you are successful beyond what most people will ever achieve, and how that thing that he did with a bunch of other people who went on that kind of that climb was probably one of the most important things that he did for himself, that gave him a lot of fuel to continue to build his business. And and continue to scale up. So I think you're on to something when you talk about the work that we do outside of it. And you said you do it for yourself. So I'd be interested to hear how you kind of slide that for yourself.
Yeah, you mentioned fulfilling experiences, and no one can tell you like how to have a how to exactly technically execute a fulfilling experience. Conceptually, absolutely, we can talk about it because it's kind of what have you been wanting to do for a while, but you haven't done because you're so dialed in to whatever your respective priorities are. I've done a lot of physical pursuits in the past. I got challenged. How long ago was it now? Back during COVID, a buddy challenged me to pursue a world record in burpees in
Yes.
3 minutes, and I was able to get that. But that was the constraints of the time really allowed for it because everything was shut down. I was at a new duty station, so I committed myself to training. Like, hey, this is achievable for me. It's kind of crazy, but every morning I would get up with my 3-year-old daughter, and I have actually more fulfilling memories not around the accomplishment, but with my daughter in those mornings. And then she
Wow.
came to future things, and she's cheering me on. But we connected these mornings, so that was a cool thing. But then that took me on like, if I could do this, what else can I do? So I just did a Spartan race last weekend. My first, I've done obstacle course race in the past, but I did that and did pretty well in the elite
Amazing.
division. Did a 20-mile ruck recently, but I love to push myself with these hard physical challenges, but just to see what I'm able to do within my head. And then really, what do I learn in my body when I feel like things are boiling up to where I can manage that, breathe through it, reframe my perspective, ultimately to make me a better father, husband, um, officer for the Navy, and just man for community. So I'm always like, how do I translate those lessons? I fail at it every day, but that is the goal. to,
Well,
to
you're a
say,
world record. You are a world record holder in the burpees, correct?
I was, yeah, it's since been beaten. Yeah.
That's amazing, though, to have that achievement where at one point you were the best in the entire world. That's
Thank you.
incredible.
Thank you, ma'am. Yeah, it's very cool. It's funny. I've done other things. I attempted to do one for air squats. I broke my shoulder a few years ago, so I
Wow.
couldn't use my arms. So I was just squatting a lot, and I got pretty good at air squats since I did it every day. And I almost got the world record. I thought I had it, but they no rep me, so I submitted that to Guinness. But the improvements that I made while injured, focusing on my legs I was more proud of than what I did with the burpees. So even my failure actually is a more fulfilling memory for me than the burpee stuff.
That's amazing. Also, no one would ever accuse you then of skipping leg day, right? Like, I mean, that's the
I
that's the
used
thing.
I used to, so now they can.
That is so wild. Yeah, but I mean, these things they translate. They make us more complete people and they make us more resilient people. So I think there's like a lot of lessons. My own history and kind of physical things is really interesting. I was in a horse accident when I was a teenager that left me in a wheelchair and unable to walk for a while. And I was in a body cast. And so kind of like learning that process of kind of learning to walk and getting back on track. And then it made me so appreciative on the other side of being someone who, thank God could get on the other side and could be someone who did that. But man, did I learn 1,000 lessons being in a wheelchair that, you don't see when you're not. And so I think that these things, they just make us more complete people, whether we're pushing and challenging ourselves from a place of health and wellness or like, with your shoulder injury or with my, accident as a teenager, you push yourself and you see what you can do and, you become a different person because through those experiences in other ways.
Absolutely. And the delayed gratification, I'm such a big fan of. So, like, initially, it's going to be tough, but part of you thinks you want to do it, or maybe you could do it, maybe you can't do it. What I've really been challenging myself lately is think of things outside the physical realm. For sure, physical pursuits are beneficial, but like, public speaking, I'm sure you don't work with as many people who are averse to public speaking just at the level that they're operating at, but that's a big one. Conversation with people that you don't agree with. Like that's one these days, whether it's online or in person, better yet. Can you stay regulated and rational, speaking on topics that you truly don't agree with? Not to prove someone wrong, not to prove yourself right, but just to find commonality with people. Like it's such an opportunity these days. It's
Agree.
uncomfortable, but psychological pain tolerance, you can build that and maybe simultaneously have more empathy for people, see where they're coming from, and learn more because it's something you've been avoiding otherwise.
Yeah, and I think you also practice the skill of emotional detachment, right? Like try to hear it for where someone's coming from and listen for curiosity and understanding over reactivity. Because I do think that we're kind of all being trained, or at least there's an attempt to train us through the algorithm to be outraged or to click on something, or like everyone optimizes for the most extreme of everything. And I think once you understand that, like, that's what they're optimizing for, that's the game for them. It doesn't have to be the game for you. My game is that, like, I love my neighbor no matter who they are, who they vote for, what they, as long as they're good to me, right? Like, you're good to me, I'm good to you. We can have differences of opinion. I think that once we get into a place where we're not able to be rational or able to pull ourselves back and say, I don't agree with that. That might even feel pretty personal, but I'd like to hear, like, why this person believes this. What's kind of the source of that? What's driving that? And if you can have a great conversation, it's amazing how much that sometimes very seemingly irrational people, that they start to meet your level. Sometimes in the real world, they meet your level. Online, they can just go their own way. But in the real world, even when people approach you and they're pretty worked up about something, they oftentimes, instead of you mirroring them, like, you have the opportunity to set the emotional tone. And I always think, like, who sets the tone in the interaction? You're either going to follow someone else or you have the opportunity to set it yourself. And so I always want to be the tone setter, like whether it's a meeting or it's, an individual interaction. Like, I am happy to meet you. If you're like full of energy and you're energized, like, I'll love following that tone with you every day of the week. But if you're going to come at something with, like, very amped up emotionally or very angry about something, like, I'm not going to join that tone. I'm just going to set a different one. And eventually, as long as you hold your line in that, people usually end up coming around to yours, or kind of you diffusing that situation through how you present yourself.
Yeah, I believe you've written on this too, with just teams, and I know I used to believe this historically, but like work atmosphere typically is going to be at the level of the lowest bar, right? So like if you have one bad apple, it could tear a team apart. Which, don't get me wrong,
Mm-hmm.
it's true based on how terrible that apple is. But at the same time, somebody having a bad day or somebody acting emotionally amped up and changing the energy in the room, it's amazing what that light can do. If you can stay regulated, if you can speak confidently, not only can you maintain the atmosphere, but you can maybe regulate the individual and de-escalate situations by keeping your own composure. So that light metaphorically can help with the darkness when it persists in whatever way. And it's important to think about, empowering to think about too. The EQ, once again, coming back to emotional intelligence.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, your situation is so interesting because when you're in the military, it isn't like you can just fire someone and they go away. In business, I encourage people to fire fast when people are that bad apple, or they kind of are a naysayer, they're negative. That kind of stuff spreads so quickly, and I'm a big fan of just kind of like, I mean, everyone has a bad day. That's not what I'm talking about. But like this kind of persistent negativity, the person that's the naysayer that kind of keeps people in a negative headspace, who complains a lot, doesn't provide a lot of solutions. They can find a home somewhere else where maybe they'll be happier. I mean, I see it as I'm doing them a kindness. You don't like being here, you don't like interacting here, you don't believe in what we're doing. You clearly need a place that you do believe in that maybe is better suited for you. And so, let's let them go and be in a place where they can be happy. Because if they can't be happy here, you need positive energy, and energy is so important, and it spreads. If you have people who are happy, who buy into the culture, who understand the mission, if you ask anybody who's working with me about, like, the caliber that we expect and the things that, we're working toward and the good that we feel that we do, I would hope that everyone would say, like, and I don't have a lot of people, but I think they would all say, like, I'm really stoked about, like, the great comment we got, or the person who said that they really, like, this really helped them. And I share that stuff. So when people, oftentimes they don't, like, share their name if it's a private message, but if it's like publicly posted, I'll share everything and I'll say, like, look at this impact we're having. Like, isn't this fantastic? Like, my editor, Caitlin, for Substack, when she helps to, like, create these great graphics or correct my spelling or my terrible grammar, like, she helps to make an impact or help to structure it in a certain way that's going to make my writing, like, come to life a little bit more, or that, she makes it so it doesn't seem like a big block of text, which I often will send her. So like she makes an impact. And, my assistant that you've had interactions with, he's such a great contributor to the team and is an interface with other people that, is really important to reputation and the work that you do. So like everyone is a part, whether or not they always feel that they are. And so, you want people who are excited about what they do and see the impact and are kind of thrilled by that. And I imagine, the military has had, like, it has such incredible impact around the world, around so many different variables, that like feeling good about the work that you do, like, we have hurricanes and places where they go to help rebuild and restructure. Even some of the work they do domestically can be really important.
Yeah, we talked about Angelo before the conversation and
Yeah,
how great he is, and you can tell how excited he is to work with you. And I mean, you have some of the most powerful writing that I've read on Substack, whether it's your
thank
notes
you.
or your posts. Just every sentence matters, everything hits. The formatting's fantastic. So Caitlin must be fantastic helping you with that, contributing
Appreciate
to just how hard hitting that is. But yeah, to your point in the military, while it is harder to fire individuals, I love that. Another important reframe to make. Sometimes the quote unquote bad apples, they just might not be fulfilled in that work. They might not have found their right place. They might be a good person, even though they perceive perceptually, quote unquote, I don't like good or bad. I don't like labeling anything but your emotions, but we do it. I catch myself doing it every day.
Yeah.
They might be that bad apple because they're just not in the good place for them. So firing fast when you can, or in the military, we have other ways like laterally transferring people elsewhere. I work in a primarily civilian organization now. There's many mechanisms to put people in places to help them thrive a little bit better if they're not there. But it's not only best for the mission, which is comes first. Good for you and your energy if that's something that you're dealing with, because we know as leaders we spend 90% of our time on that 10% of the population and problems that are coming out of it. But it's good for that person too, so you can help them, moving them to give them an opportunity elsewhere. So another great reframe from you today. I love it.
Well, thank you.
For emotional intelligence, are there certain skills that you really focus on when you try to help people cultivate that skill?
So, emotional intelligence, I would say that sometimes that is a skill that, and this is going to be maybe it's an insight that people don't think about, but it's not going to be everyone's skill. And sometimes it's not going to be everyone's skill. And so, for some people, when they like, I will work sometimes with people who say, look, I'm really good at understanding how to scale a business, but I'm not really good with people. And I've had leaders who aren't really great with people. And you go, well, how could they be the CEO or, whatever, and not be great with people? Because maybe they're really great at, maybe they're in, like really great at their technical skill. They're really great at, some of these other elements of putting a business together. And so we'll talk about, well, how do you position so that you are in your best zone? Like sometimes, if the skill is something that is pretty significant and it's something that like they are very aware of and kind of probably aren't going to shift a lot, I'm not going to put them in a place to operate in an average to below average capacity when someone else can take up that kind of bar and do it beautifully. So my goal with people who are operating at a high level is always to look at, okay, what are the areas where you are exceptional? Because if you're already exceptional and you're at that level, you're just head and shoulders above everyone else. So I want to lean into that more to create even more distance between you and everyone else out there. So I try not to, I don't spend a lot of time in those people developing those skills. We'd probably work more in that case on like the specific types of interactions that they have that are problematic and trying to kind of do some really specific work around those. So they might have like 3 or 4 or maybe even 5 direct reports and talking about like those individual personalities and how can we best work with each of those rather than trying to develop a baseline skill of emotional intelligence, which probably isn't going to happen in the time that I'm working with them. And frankly, I want them to be spending more time in the stuff that they're great at. So we'll talk about ways to kind of either compensate for some of those weaknesses or deal specifically with certain instances where they need to be effective. But probably that underlying skill isn't really going to be as developed just because I wouldn't have the ability to just train it from a certain level of challenge. But I mean, we can do that, but it's probably not in their best interest, which is odd because what I'm hired to do is really make the business the best it can be through them. And if they come to me and say, I want to be the best, like, person I can be, well rounded, that would probably be a different mission. But for the sake of the business, their highest leverage is not going to be learning those skills most of the time. So I want the individual skills. And then, so maybe that's not the question you answer you probably wanted to hear.
Well, it makes a lot of sense for the level you're operating at. If they want speed and the business is coming first, rather than building a skill that's going to take some time, let's find ways to complement where you're exceptional by adding teams around you, like you talked about being effective number two. Effective number two
Yeah.
is not a replica of number one. They're going to
Right.
complement one another, just like in relationships. While a lot of my small problems would be a lot easier if I married someone like myself, there would be a lot of big problems around me. I'm thankful that I have a wife that compliments me very well, and I'm much better because of her. Because we see things differently, we attack problems differently. So yeah, the small stuff can be annoying, but that's true of anything. That's diversity of thought, and then we can learn from each other over time. So again, the carryover from your wisdom to other aspects of life, but find ways to complement some of your shortcomings. Work on them yourself. But if you're operating at your level and speed and efficiency are the priority to help the business, then your answer is beautiful. I love that.
Yeah, and I do work on it with their direct reports. Like, for example, like if they have people they need to interact with and interact with maybe more effectively. But yeah, at a large scale, it's kind of like probably not something we're going to spend a lot of time on. The other people in the organization, however, like sometimes they'll say, hey, like, can you work with so and so, who's one of my leaders who is charged with doing X, Y, and Z? Then maybe you would spend a bit more time there. But it's really about kind of understanding, when you're talking about EQ, there's so much to it around, like perspective taking and understanding that really can help to benefit people. So when I do have to, kind of do some of that work, we do a lot of just perspective taking work, because I think part of the problem, and even you were saying about, talking with other people who think differently than you, who may believe differently than you, perspective taking is such an incredible skill that if you're able to put yourself in another's position and ask questions from that vantage point, like, why do you think they're so upset about this? Why do you think that, they're, kind of not telling you things that they should be telling you? In a business setting, whenever you see that someone is not telling you things they should be telling you, sometimes it's because you're a little intimidating. Maybe you don't give them great feedback. Maybe you get really angry. Maybe you don't respond properly. Maybe you're not particularly approachable. Like, so these are ways in which you can start, like, kind of developing that skill through the back door if you needed to.
Love it. So there's a writer on Substack who I knew about a long time ago. He wrote a book called Left of Bang. So the Marine Corps, back in the day, they developed the Marine Corps Hunter program during the war in Afghanistan and Iraq to help identify threats. So left of bang, the concept is being left of before bang happens. So in a military environment, of course, before loss of life. But he expanded that concept and he applies it to business now and preparedness mindsets across all organizations. And it comes a lot into just premeditation of future
Hmm.
anomalies or future
Yeah.
things that could impact the organization. You work with people scaling at high levels. Maybe some have experienced failure before, maybe some have not. I assume some have, and that's why they come to you to look for other opportunities. But how much do you deal with kind of that concept of left of bang or premeditation on future adversities that could impact your ability to scale, to recognize threats and respond accordingly?
We do a lot with that. That's a really great insight. We call it seeing around corners, right? So in business, it's the same concept. It's just, how well do you see around corners, and how well are you able to see around corners, like 3, 6 months from now, a year from now, and how much can you anticipate? And so I think one of the biggest things that I can do for people who are operating at that level is that, most of them don't want to ever create space. Like, that's something that they hate. Like, they don't like an hour off. They feel like that's a very unproductive thing. But sometimes in order to effectively see around corners, you need time to think about that. And, blocking out time to think and to strategize and to actually look at the landscape in a way that isn't just like intuitive and reactive and kind of informed by what's currently out there, and do a little bit of digging, do a little bit of sleuthing, do a little bit of kind of the lookout in ways that you wouldn't normally do, is so absolutely essential. And it's probably the thing that everybody I work with hates, is that I will say, like, you need to block out time to just strategize, to think, and to actually like really consider, like, it's not that they don't consider how the business moves ahead. They're very smart about it and doing things. But oftentimes, if you give yourself a moment and take a step back and do kind of really some of the digging that you wouldn't have time for, you'll end up seeing the things that you wouldn't have seen before. And that's really, they know where to look, they know what areas to uncover and what to really begin exploring. But that's a really important concept because then it also directs other things like what kind of partnerships should you have to kind of avoid the challenge. Because much like anything else, you're looking for, in strategy, how am I going, you see this happening a lot with AI right now, right? OpenAI, not a client of mine, so I feel comfortable kind of like talking about them. But you'll notice that Sam Altman, who leads OpenAI, he knows everyone. He knows how to partner with everyone. He knows how to strategically place his company so that they get maximum government contracts or exposures. Or, I mean, say what you will about him personally. I know that he's a very controversial figure, but he knows how to look at the landscape and position for whatever it is that's coming. And he does it just brilliantly. He's a really interesting man to watch in a burgeoning kind of technology for how he does that so publicly. A lot of them, like Jensen, does it more kind of behind the scenes, but Sam is very much like, hey, we're going to announce this partnership with so and so, and we're going to, like, we're having these meetings with so and so, and like whether it's Microsoft or AMD or chip manufacturers, and like he just he's really good at seeing the landscape. So that's a really great example of how people begin to use their time. And then he has someone on the ground who's doing kind of like day-to-day stuff, but he is always kind of exactly what you're saying, looking at how do I stay, I guess left of bang it's called, how do I stay in that position to continue to stay alive and grow forward, because is always someone, especially in AI, looking to eat your lunch. And that is such a competitive space with people, with talent, with everything else. He's got a job on his hands, as does everyone who's running those companies right now.
And per usual, you take these concepts and you can relate it to your life and resilience once again. But you alluded to a lot of strategies within Sam Altman's company of diversification of the network, of the ties that he makes, these different opportunities to have available to you. So if something happens that disrupts his company, he's so spread out, he has all of these different opportunities. That is resilience at an organizational level, but also at a personal level. The flexibility and how we can respond internally. And as you mentioned, blocking an hour at a time is a high task for a lot of individuals. And I know it is for you too.
Yeah.
And we've already, as I mentioned, I could talk to you all day. I think I've covered about a quarter of my notes that I had of past posts. That's okay. This has been incredible. I cannot thank you enough for taking the time to talk to me today and share some of your wisdom. How cool that you're in this field where not only you are helping high performing CEOs impact the world even better, but then you take their wisdom, I assume, to help yourself, but also you help all of us through your newsletter. I can't thank you enough for doing that. It's one of my favorites on the platform, and I'll be a member for life.
Thank you so much, Kyle. It was really a pleasure to meet you. And if you need anything, please, like, you have my information now. Ping me anytime. Consider me a contact.
I appreciate that. You have a great day, and thank you again.
Thank you, sir.